Hello everyone. Well, whilst this video is basically about yesterday when I appeared on the Nana Akua show, it was a very strange day for me yesterday. So I thought I'd relate what my day was like to you. And because it was a pretty heated exchange with Jim Dale. But my heated exchanges started well before that. So let me explain. I got up at 7 o'clock in the morning and left the house at 7:45. I have to drive about 30 or 40 miles to a railway station, and then I have to wait there to see if the trains turn up with the strike actions, etc. And then I have to head off to London. So I sat in a window seat with a table. And so there were 3 seats around me empty, plus the other side was empty. And a gentleman came along and asked could his group sit with me. They didn't know who I was. I was just a stranger on a train, of course. And so I was surrounded by this group. And quite bluntly, the bloke in front of me asked me, what do you do, sort of thing, where are you going, sort of thing. He was just being chatty, he was being friendly. And I told him. And he actually was totally fascinated, absolutely fascinated. He declared himself as the Christian movement of Extinction Rebellion. I now found myself completely surrounded, both on the other side of the train and my side, alongside me and in front of me, cannons to the front of them, cannons to the left of them, like brigade stuff. I found myself completely surrounded by these people, but in front of me was a man who said, look, tell me, Paul, tell me, I have never heard anything against all these beliefs. I don't know there was any opposition to this. It's all settled. And so he was very sensible. I thought, wow, first time I've ever met anyone like this. So he said, can I call my sort of chief of the clan across? So he went further up the carriage and got this bloke who sat there alongside him. And I showed him, I tried to explain, he was very hostile. And I showed him the IPCC report. Now, this report is a table, and there's a reference to it. And this was, I was later to show on television. And the reaction was just like this. Yeah, that was the reaction. And totally hostile. No, that can't be true. No, bang, bang, bang. And hostility turned up and immediately went into attack on me personally. And the bloke opposite me, who's totally open-minded, I think, unbelievably, he said, no. And I said, look, this man's being scientific. He's asking me questions and wanting evidence. And no, you can't be doing that. So totally hostile. This carried on. But then he left, the chief of them left and went up the carriage. Only returned about 30 minutes later. I was trying to educate this bloke with a lot of hostility from the other side of the carriage with the women as well. I mean, quite vicious stuff, actually, some of it. And then the boss returned and says, right, I've got you. And he's really proud to, expose me for who I am. So he said, you're Professor Paul Burgess from Cranfield College, an agricultural scientist, blah, 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 and you've been found out, and so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so. So I tried to say I wasn't, but that didn't matter. So when he finished his spiel, having got his gotcha movement, I said, that's not me. And he said, but it's the same name. I said, it might be, but it's not me. So he then scrambled around for a bit, and they realised I was telling the truth. It wasn't me. They thought I was lying at first. And then they came up with Paul Burgess, a pop singer. Bum, bum. No, that's not me either. And I then tried to explain, it doesn't matter who I am. I'm not going to go into it. What matters is evidence. They weren't interested. So it was very much a moment, and I'll repeat it, when I showed them this IPCC table, the reaction from the opposition is, again, this. What I didn't know was that reaction was going to be repeated almost on air. So having got to London, I usually have to wait a bit in the green room of the studios, and to be greeted by Jim Dale. And Jim Dale, and we get on normally behind the scenes there, and Jim Dale didn't know what the subject was. Well, we both get told every Thursday what the subject is, and this week's was the National Audit Officers saying the government's not prepared for 5 major climate things. So what I did was I literally read the papers and came up with arguments against, to begin with, that A, there's no more extreme weather on these things they're talking about, and why. And basically the IPCC table was to show that, except for warming, which they do claim, which I was then going to deal with separately. So that was the first stage, and then I was going to move on to something, by the way, which is very much my area, which is, things like land drainage they brought up, things like droughts, things like floods, by the way, of which there is no evidence, So I will now go and cut to the programme, and we'll dissect it as we go, because the reaction was incredible.
Good afternoon, 26 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is Gbnews. We are the People's Channel. Right, it's time now for Climate Control, where we unpick the debate around the climate. And let's kick it off with this one, because the National Audit Office has warned that the UK government has no effective strategy to protect the country from extreme conditions. Bit like nothing, when they had nothing prepared for COVID. Remember that? Now, this comes as scientists warn that the Earth is on the verge of 5 catastrophic climate tipping points as the planet warms. So should we be worried about the UK's safety if the planet warms? I'm joined now in the studio by meteorologist and social commentator Jim Dale, and also climate scientist Paul Burgess. Jim Dale, I'll start with you. Should we be worried?
Yeah, of course we should be worried, not with a capital W. I think all the writing's on the wall. All the scientists have come out with... over many years.
What does the writing on the wall say?
The writing on the wall says that we've got to stop fossil fuel emissions at the rate that they are at this moment in time. Otherwise, the world will continue to warm up, as it is doing. Just as the Met Office said this week, that 2024 will be as bad, if not worse, in terms of extremes, catastrophes, record temperatures. We haven't got to the end of 2023, but we know which direction that's going in.
Do we?
So all of this is writing on the wall. It's done, it's dusted, and we've got that ahead of us in terms of what's going to happen if the world doesn't progress, and that's what COP28 is all about. That's what they're trying to achieve. Whether they achieve it is a separate matter. 27 COPs later, we haven't. But nonetheless, what we're seeing around the world, and even in our own country, 2 storms, by the way, not necessarily climate change, but Storm Ellie and Storm Franklin tomorrow, one after another. It seems to me that we're on a train to nowhere.
No, I have to intervene at that point, because this doom and gloom and this idea that is moving now from each storm being climate change, maybe not, maybe this one is, maybe this one isn't, that's an absurd position. I mean, for a start, you can't tell individual storms, let alone individual years or 5 years. You do need, I keep saying it, the long term to see the climate change. You need to see the cycle to see, what the overall effect is. But now, these last 2 storms that we're in now, they're not really bad storms. They're just bad, they're just poor, lousy winter weather. Nothing amazing, and nor how the droughts he's going to refer to. So this is just this doom and gloom without any evidence at all. So I thought, in my way of countering, I knew what was coming. First of all, we have to decide, well, is there extreme weather? Because you don't prepare the infrastructure against something unknown. You prepare it against what you know to be reasonably the case. So I have to challenge this. There's no choice. This was going to cause quite a row, which carried on into the green room afterwards. And even a producer interfered with it, actually. So this is the doom and gloom. I have got no choice now but to counter that. Because before we discuss the infrastructure, which I have a lot to say on, and which, of course, I've been involved in my life, I have to deal with this. There's no choice. So the easy way is to say, well, what extremes are we talking about? So I just took a section from the IPCC report, and that was the idea. Let's get a base here, because the truth is that, things like storms and hurricanes aren't increasing. The truth is that droughts are decreasing, if anything, a huge amount of evidence on that. But they won't admit that, the IPCC. What they'll say is there's no change in the historic record. So the table I'm about to show shows that, according to the IPCC scientists, they cannot find any increasing problem with terms of frequency or magnitude with the droughts, with the hurricanes, and so on and so on. So I just took a section from the report, and at the end of this, I'll give you the links to it, the whole table, which is even worse for them, of course, because I've only taken the ones that the audit office are referring to. So that's where we are, and Well, I'm just amazed at it, but I know, and I think Anna Akua was expecting that sort of doom and gloom, you know. And by the way, before I go to that, I did have some fun stuff to show, which is, I mean, this graph here, for example, of the time when we had the Little Ice Age and the weather was blamed on witches. And you can actually correlate the Ice Age and the temperatures with the burning and hanging of witches. And at that time, of course, universities taught witchcraft. They taught how to find a witch and how to detect them, how to punish them, what signs a witch would show. You could take doctorates in it in universities. And these people, these university trained people, sat in judgment on the witches, like in the Salem trials. They were all, you know, Princeton and Yale type of people, you know, hanging witches. So, and that's all putting the climate down to witches. Sometimes I feel as if we haven't progressed. But I'm going to return now to my reaction to that.
A train to nowhere, he says. He talks of extreme catastrophes and a train to nowhere. The writing is on the wall, Paul.
Well, let's put some writing on the wall.
Okay.
Can you bring my first image up, please? Yeah?
OK, let's take a look at your first slide, Paul. Let's have a look at his first slide.
There we are. Now, this is taken, there's a copy for you, Nana. There's a copy for Jim. Right. This is taken from the IPCC AR6 report. And what I've done is just, I put some of the black writing, the big black writing's mine, where you've got on the left-hand side the particular incidents, yeah? Where
So at the top, nothing emerged in historic record. This is the first one I'm looking at. What is that about?
Well, that's saying, up to now,
Yep.
there has been no greater frequency or worsening of all these things.
Oh, so
Up
that's
until
rivers. So on the other side, it says so rivers, floods, rain, heavy participation,
right. All these things.
rain,
that's-
landslides, arid. And what's this from?
This is from the references at the bottom, so all your
The
viewers...
IPCC,
The
which are the
IPCC,
body-
Chapter 12, Table 12.1.
And what year is this?
This is the latest report,
the latest
AR6.
report. So this is the IPCC report, Jim Dale.
No, I don't-
Let me finish.
Yeah, go on.
You can't say no because you know what I'm going to say. Okay, it's the
Say
report.
no to this.
Yeah, okay, but he's printed out a copy of the report. We won't put it up if it's not the real thing. And he's pointing out something that the IPCC are saying, which is that these things that you said, you talked about catastrophes and extremes, aren't actually happening.
Yeah, well, you have put it up, and it is wrong because no legitimate scientist is going to say nothing has emerged in the historic record to say things haven't changed. There's been no catastrophic event. There has been, as I said, you know, on this programme before, eyes wide shut.
Just well, because it sounds like your eyes are shut.
No. Just because you put nothing emerged in historic record, nothing even anticipated on worst case scenario, even by 2100, it goes against all known science.
So there we are. You know, I've held up the crucifix, as it were, and he is reacting with an absolute no. This is not true. This can't be true. It goes against all known science, all known science, and yet what I'm showing, and I had ready, is the science. So he just totally does not accept it. The reason is Jim Dale lives in a world of alarm. He lives in a world of spin, and he doesn't never look at the science. But it gets worse. Let's proceed.
It's as simple as that,
yeah,
and that's why
are you debunking something that's come from the IPCC? Let me just be clear.
There are 97 pages, I think, in that report. Am I right with that, Paul?
This is now called displacement behaviour, where extra things are brought up to look good. How many pages there are in section 12? I haven't a clue. It's irrelevant. So a number of little side issues to displace the argument will now be brought up.
I don't know how many. I think it's 97. 97. He may have extracted a little bit and made it.
No,
like you can do with these things, where there is a slight waiver here or a waiver there.
I can explain.
The major thing about the IPCC is it points unequivocally towards a global warming continuing and going to the extremes where we have catastrophic events occurring across the world at different times. And that's exactly what we're now seeing.
OK, Paul.
OK. Now, what Jim is saying is partly right, which is the IPCC does say that, but they go against their own scientists. That's the problem. You see, what you have is the IPCC put out a summary report, which all the governments read, called the Summary for Policymakers. That is decided on by the 185 delegates from governments who agree to each sentence and so on. So what they actually spin out is different. Could we go to the next slide, please?
All right, let's pop up the next slide, please, and let's take a look. So what will this slide tell us? Talk me through.
This slide is a report, the reference is on it, showing globally over the earth, droughts have declined by this percentage, and the percentage of decline in the last period since 1982 to 2012.
What about the period after that, though? Because that's...
Well, in actual fact, again, droughts have declined, and that's my particular expertise. I actually have data here. The worst droughts in the UK...
How come you haven't put the most current slide up, then?
There isn't the most current slide.
This is a guy called
That's the most current for that
Whitestone.
study. I've already put up, and I've got them here if you want. I've got slides going back to 1775 and 1776. All the worst droughts occurred before the Industrial Revolution.
And this is Gregory Whitestone, right?
That's right.
They're occurring now.
They're occurring now, all these worst droughts, like the ones in the 1700s, that went for 18 months across the entire UK, devastated everything. Here's the list, by the way, in the UK of the worst droughts. I've done this in previous videos. Now, regarding the UK, this is the paper I'm using here, the scientific reference, and I'm going to show you an excerpt from my video, which I made a while back, called Climate Alarmists and Droughts. It goes into some detail, that video, but here's a short clip from it to give you the feel of it. We can't link droughts to man-made CO2 emissions. Now looking at duration as the criteria, and here is the ranking again, as you can see here, and I won't list droughts. Now flipping over to intensity as the criteria. And actually, as you can see here, our 1976 drought did come in second. But again, we had worse, even in intensity, the short, sharp intensity part of it, we had worse before. And again, you can see there is no correlation whatsoever between CO2 put in by man and droughts. So no matter how you measure droughts then, whether you measure them by accumulated deficit, duration or intensity, the past were worse than today. This is a UK official report from the government, the Environment Agency official report on climate change and droughts. This report builds on the work on the paper that I've just explained to you. And the shock is that it supports it. So let's not go into great detail in the report because you can reference it yourself, but let's look at its conclusion. So I quote from the conclusion. It is clear that throughout the historical record, drought has been a recurring feature of the UK climate, with recent drought events by no means exceptional in terms of their intensity or duration. Because the problem for Jim, who just says, no, I can't accept that, and then says the worst droughts are occurring now, Where are they? Droughts have always and always will occur, but they're not major, they're not getting worse, they're actually getting better. And I'm now going to prove that beyond doubt. But he hasn't any of this science, and he never presents evidence back to me. So let's deal with it and kill this one for all now. Well, in order to kill this off once and for all, I'm starting with this one going back to 800 AD. It's a drought record of the American West. And what it shows, by the way, reinforces the medieval warm period, reinforces the Little Ice Age. But more importantly for this particular aspect, it shows that there are much drier conditions then for long periods of time, hundreds of years, whereas much wetter later for long periods of time. So on this basis, and it's based on the American West, I know, there is less droughts. Let's carry on. Right, this report is from NASA. Drought has disappeared from much of the US. Right, fine. And 17 years, decreasing drought, etc., showing the records. And this is from Jim's other famous source, NASA, that he tends to quote. But when Jim, if he looks at the science behind all the spin, he'll see the science doesn't match the spin. He lives in a world of spin, not in a world of science. I live in a world of science, and I totally want to oppose the spin, and that's what you have to do. So there we are, Jim. That's what NASA have to say. But there's more coming. This is the source for the next graph. He can't really argue, and if he wants to have a go at individuals, there's quite a lot contributed to it. So this is the source for this next graph that I'm about to show you now. I'll first of all explain something. The PDSI is the Palmer Drought Severity Index. It's an index used to determine the likelihood of droughts, if you like, because the conditions are wet and dry, etc., that create drought, or the lack of wet, of course. And so on this next graph, I've just tried to explain what it means. And what the graph shows here is that has been declining since, in this case, 1950. In actual fact, it's been declining since the 1930s. So let's just see what notes they put with this graph. So they say the key points are that the average drought conditions across the nation, that's the USA, have varied over time. The 1930s and 1950s saw the most widespread droughts. By the way, the 1930s heat wave sort of thing, they did away with, don't forget. So all the information, when you start to do science, the truth pokes out everywhere on everything. It's lovely the way it does it. So whilst the last 50 years have generally been wetter than average, see figures 1 and 2, over the entire period shown in figures 1 and 2, the overall trend has been towards wetter conditions, with the SBEI increasing at a rate of about 0.04 units per decade. So in other words, they're saying less droughts. Absolutely clear, less droughts. But now I'm going to go global again. The SPEI is another indicator of drought. It's a mixture of elements that come together to create droughts, and it's an index they use. And this is from the Global Drought Monitor. So there's an organization that globally monitors droughts in the world, and there's the reference to it there. You can look it up yourself, and I've taken the graph from that same page as the reference. And this graph shows, again, since 1950, matching the USA stuff, that globally the droughts frequency has decreased. You can see it curving down towards the year 2020 and past. So it actually is right up to date. So right up to date, Jim Dale, the Drought Monitor Index is less than it has been, and it has declined. We are not getting more frequent droughts. It's in your imagination, every little weather event being made into a catastrophe. Just absolute nonsense.
You can pick anybody like Gregory Whitestone, one person in the entire universe, and say, he's come up with this, so I'll take that one.
Does now is say, he's just said, you picked one person in the universe. He doesn't seem to understand that scientific papers are published in their thousands, and the authors are, there in the paper. In fact, that's how academia progresses. They all try to publish and compete with papers, etc. So quoting and attacking, as he does now, he does a personal attack on this author without any reference, not knowing anything about them, and just goes on to insult them. He doesn't say, I'll look at the evidence, I'll come back and see that. No, he doesn't do that. Nothing to do with evidence with Jim Dale. He does an incredible attack now on the author, making all sorts of childish comments rather than dealing with the evidence. Anything but deal with the evidence. Listen to this.
Who is Gregory Whitestone?
Who is this guy who lives in a cave somewhere and writes this? And
you see, all you do is you don't argue the evidence ever.
I'm arguing the evidence.
No, you're not. You're not arguing the evidence.
Okay.
I've put evidence.
Equally. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I wasn't asked to. I didn't realise we were going to actually talk about this. So
he didn't realise we were going to talk about this. But he opened with it. He opened with a whole pile of doom and gloom predictions and how catastrophes are striking the world all the time. Well, I'm supposed to accept that and then have a discussion on the infrastructure to cope with it. What has to come first is what the problem is and then how you deal with it, not how you deal with it without knowing what the problem is or accepting his, frankly, mad world on it. So he is the one who started this with the opening salvo. I was just prepared. I had a huge amount of evidence with me I could have shown to the camera, as it were. They don't like me doing that. They much prefer me now to send them in, which is better. But I don't know which way the attack's going to go. So what I do is I do it in these follow-ups to show you the amount of evidence that I have available and listening to this rubbish.
When the producer asks me next week to come onto the programme and gives us a subject,
all right,
we will do this. I'll bring you information from NASA, from NOAA.
No, you have to refute. You have to refute what I've just claimed from IPCC. You have to say, Paul, you've already said it. You said I've cherry-picked it and distorted it. Right, you have to prove that because I am quoting the reference. All the viewers can see the reference on it and they can check.
Anybody can go and look at this guy, Gregory.
Yeah, that's right. They can. And tell me a study. Tell me any study that shows droughts increasing. There aren't.
Well, listen. Okay. Well, that's a challenge for Jim Dale.
One more.
I can do that quite happily.
Next week, he will bring in something that says that droughts are increasing, even though the reports from the IPCC appear to say that they're not.
That's not the
Jim
IPCC.
Dale, Well, no, that's the page before. The page before.
Gregory Whitestone, who nobody's ever heard of.
No. This is all on the page before as well.
Yeah.
Well, listen, that's, of course, Jim Dale, meteorologist and social commentator, and also Paul Burgess, climate scientist.
You know, almost any paper I quote has got an author that no one will have ever heard of, because there's thousands of scientists, there's thousands of these things. So he seems to think, unless he's heard of it, you know, so he's going to bring a report from NASA now to show droughts are increasing. Well, that's really good, because that just shows NASA's own Earth program showing they're decreasing. It doesn't matter who he brings from. I brought it from IPCC, and I'll just bring this up again now. Let me explain. The IPCC could not find any evidence of any change from natural variability in droughts or in all the other items I just highlighted, and not even going forward for some of them. Where the difference was they claimed there was extra warming, and that caused, you know, extra warming problems. Not droughts, mind you, or not storms either. But they say that, and then I had that last graph of temperatures, which I'll show again here now. You see, the temperatures from the models that they use, they're just opinions, the models, don't agree with the observations. And unless it agrees with the observations, it's wrong. It's as simple as that. There's nothing complicated here. Now, you've got to understand now, the IPCC are really a government organisation and all about distribution of money to the third world. Truth doesn't come into this anywhere. You know, OK, I'm passionate about this big lie. I dedicate a large chunk of my life, much to the chagrin of my wife. But, you know, that day, I left home at 7:45 in the morning, got up at 7, left 7:45. I travelled until about, we were late, the train was late, about 2:45. I was in the studio then until around about 20 to 4, 4:45. What ensued then was a bit of a row with Jim, because he argued that he'd been tricked a bit because he hadn't been told this was going to be discussed. But he's the one who started it. He's the one who made all the claims about catastrophes. So I don't accept that. A producer came and tried to intervene in the green room. It was quite funny. But he has now promised to produce the evidence. He won't be able to, because it's not there. And why the IPCC here in this table say it's not there is because it's not there. And when you realise the discrepancy between the scientific data and the information, the evidence, and what is being told to you by government bodies like the IPCC, which is spread now to local councils. I can't name them, but a council has just contacted me to say, you know, they're terrible. They were promised if they sign up to this climate thing as a council, they wouldn't lose their funding. So blackmail. But it wouldn't cost any more. But already it's cost the council $250,000. And already now they've got to do more. They've got to now start looking at vehicles and doing this and this. Huge costs onto you, the consumer. You are paying for all this in every single area. You have no idea, probably, how much you're paying for it now, because it's right the way through the system. And it's got to be stopped. Now, I only had, 6 or 7 minutes total there. And yet I didn't get back home until nearly 11 o'clock at night. So, I was gone for 13 or 14 hours to get a few minutes on telly. And I don't get any money. I just get my expenses covered. That's all that happens to me. The only time I get money, if I do a podcast, if I do a Zoom call, they pay me £40, fine. But I've only done the one. Now, so I dedicate a huge chunk of my weekend, well, the whole weekend, to this. And during the week, I'm obviously working on it and various other things. So I'm putting all this effort in because it's a tiny foothold into the media for me. And I'm the only one doing this in the media. Who else in the media is telling the public they want more CO2, not less? Who else in the media is doing it with the sort of depth of knowledge that I can bring forward? No one. And therefore, even though it's a little tiny foothold, my tenacity is going to keep on going, putting all this time in to get a few minutes. I'd love a proper debate. Believe me, I'd love one. And I hope I can convince. I'm trying to leave people with documents to expose things. And just to finish it off, behind the scenes, I mentioned to the producer there who intervened, I mentioned to the producer I've got a scandal to expose, which is the wind farm and solar farm one, which depends on dividing one number by another, to which Jim responded, that's a conspiracy theory. So, I've been living into that world. So it's been a very funny day for me yesterday, from the beginning to the end, and all of it's been the same. They don't listen. They're not interested. We're fighting a religion, actually. We're fighting a belief system. We're not fighting reality. And that belief system has penetrated every part of our society, every single part. I'm going to leave you now with this, but I hope you've enjoyed the unusual aspect of this, as it were, and by all means, check out the IPCC document. It's real, and it's only real, by the way. I mean, they clearly state it, so there's no going back on it. It's only real because it's true. They can't find the evidence because it's not there. Okay, thank you for watching.